Is there a TCU 2.0 for the 2023 college football season? I personally don't believe so, but if there was at least one team that could have an argument and give a compelling case, Louisville would probably be your best answer. If you're brand new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel at Mr. Cole Thompson. I talk college football, NFL, MLB, NBA, and almost every sport every single day, so you're not going to want to miss out. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mr. Cole Thompson. I talk all NFL, college football over there as well. And if we get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the month, I will shave my head live on air. All this luscious hair gone November 1st. All you need to do is hit subscribe. Tell your friends about it. Tell your enemies about it. If you want to go ahead and give someone pain and suffering to listen to my voice, you can totally do so. At Mr. Cole Thompson on YouTube, at Mr. Cole Thompson on Twitter. Now, TCU. TCU last year, in my opinion, was an anomaly of the sport, and for good reason. We had never seen a roster be reconstructed overnight to where they go from being a sub-500 team to making it to the national championship. It's just very uncommon to think about in the sport, mainly because of the way rosters have been built, the way recruiting has played a major factor, and also just the culture and chemistry. But when it came to TCU, there were a couple things that went at their disposal. Number one, you had a coach that was already in-state recruiting for his own program at SMU with Sonny Dykes coming on over. So Sonny Dykes took a lot of his players that worked in his style of offense and his successful defense, and he said, I'm not going to be in the AAC. I'm going to go to the Big 12. It's a bigger brand. It's bigger money. It's bigger marketing. It's a bigger shot for you to be on the main stage. So a lot of players bought into what was being sold to them in Dallas, and they took that talent over to Fort Worth. The other thing was it was a very veteran roster. You had an experienced quarterback in Max Duggan. You had two great receivers with exceptional chemistry in the passing attack in Darius Davis and Quentin Johnston. You had a good rushing attack led by Kendre Miller. And it did stink to lose multiple players, including Zach Evans in the offseason, but that opened up you to have a more balanced one kind of bell cow running back. And they had good defensive players. Dee Winters was one. Dylan Horton led the Big 12 in sacks last year with 10.5. And they also went and they added in proven vets for the transfer portal. It wasn't a top 5 recruiting class in terms of the transfers, but it was good enough to say, here's a flaw here, here's a hole there, let's plug and play them in these certain spots, and we can go ahead and benefit from it. And that's kind of what worked in TCU's favor. They also changed defensive looks from the 4-2-5 that was run underneath Gary Patterson, and they brought in a 3-3-5 under Joe Gillespie, and that really did pay dividends in terms of keeping the defense kind of fresh. They weren't always kind of catching for breath, and they caught teams at the right time. I mean, if you go back and look at TCU's schedule, they really started coming to their own roughly around the same time Louisville got the upset win over Notre Dame. They got the win against Kansas. That was a top 25 team. Then they go to double overtime against Oklahoma State. Another top 25 win against Kansas State. Then they kind of controlled the table all the way until they had to face off against Kansas State, the rematch in the Big 12 title. So they caught teams at the right time, and they were able to just physically outwork them, dominate them, and it led to another victorious week. And that was really the key element to a team like TCU. The same thing is kind of being implemented when it comes to Jeff Brom and the Louisville Cardinals. I do not think that Louisville right now is going to be able to sustain this amount of success in terms of a college football playoff appearance. But that does not mean that if they don't continue to do what they're doing, they aren't deserving of accolades and garneration, because they absolutely are. Jeff Brom had a relationship with Louisville for a very long time. He played at Louisville. He understands the culture at Louisville. He's a Louisville alum. He got his big start at Louisville. And then he got passed up when Scott Satterfield got the job and he was at Purdue. And it felt like at that point, all right, this wagon, the ship has sailed. We're moving off of ever having this guy come back. And then they move off of Satterfield because Satterfield takes his job at Cincinnati. So the job opens up once again. And Louisville's like, we have to get back Jeff Brom. And Brom had been an experienced head coach who had worked in the Big Ten for 6+ years when he was at Purdue. So he already knew what it was like to go up against top-tier talent every single Saturday. He knew what it was like to win on the recruiting trail against lesser-tier teams that probably are in your same registration, like in Indiana or in Illinois or a Rutgers for that matter. And he knew what he wanted out of the transfer portal. So those little tidbits have helped now Louisville establish an identity and a culture from the jump that really allows them to say that we're 6-0, we can hold our own in the ACC, and we might even be willing to be a legitimate threat to make the college football playoff. There is a pathway. I think what's really important here is three main assets. Number one, experienced quarterback. And it's not just in terms of experience of having a guy like Jack Plummer who's played 31 games throughout his entire college career in the last 6 seasons. He was recruited by Brom when he was at Purdue, and he played at Purdue before he went to Cal. So when you get Jack Plummer, who already understands this is the style of offense we're running, this is the way that I have to conduct the offense, these are the type of play calls that I'm going to have at my disposal, it gives you an advantage when it comes to dominating and creating an identity. And that's really worked out for them, is that experience at quarterback with a guy who understands what Brom is looking for in terms of offensive success. And you've seen this from time to time. Whenever a coach goes to a new school, they'll usually bring in some veteran, or in the NFL, they'll bring in some free agent that has experience with the offense because they want to establish something and get the message out to everyone else in the room. Perfect example was last year. Kalen DeBoer at Washington went into the transfer portal and pulled out Michael Penix Jr. Now, Penix Jr. never played for him at Fresno State, but he did play for him at Indiana. So he knew what style of offense they want to run, and lo and behold, they went 11-2. They're one of the favorites to win the college football playoff this year, and they have one of the best games ahead this weekend against Oregon. Not to mention, Penix is probably the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy as of this point. So the exact same thing happened with Louisville when they went and they got Jack Plummer. Number two, they have experience on the defensive side of the football. This is a team that ranks top 25 in total yards allowed, top 30 in scoring. They also rank in the top 10 in interceptions, and they're one of the best teams when it comes to turnover ratio. You do realize what happened in this past game this week against Notre Dame. They caught Notre Dame at a very good time. Notre Dame was coming off of two very emotional matchups against Ohio State, a game they lost, and then they basically won on the final play against Duke on the road, which is another tough matchup because Mike Elko's defenses are second to none. They always come ready to play, and they're always eager, and they're physical, and they're very hard to control. And Notre Dame, you could see by, I would say, no later than the second quarter, they were emotionally drained. And that was a major factor that favored Louisville in this game. It wasn't that Louisville was a better team. Louisville probably is about the same level of a competition as Notre Dame, but Notre Dame was just so mentally exhausted, and they took advantage of that. 5 turnovers in the game. One of the biggest assets to Notre Dame's success has been running the football. Audric Estime couldn't get anything on the ground. It was an atrocious performance when it came to the rushing attack. And that was major because of eventually you were able to kind of go ahead and retake the lead, gain that momentum, and carry out for a top 10 win. Because Notre Dame was top 10 at the time. I mean, Audric Estime rushed for, 20 yards? As a unit, the team only rushed for 44 yards on the day. Like, when you're able to do that against one of the better teams that's known for its ground and pound success, you really can hold your own against anybody. And the third thing, which is really important here, is scheduling. You don't face off against Florida State during the regular season. Massive win if you are Louisville right now. You don't face off against Clemson. Massive win for Louisville right now. And the two teams that probably are going to stand in your way have massive flaws as well. Miami. Miami is a team that last week completely imploded on itself because Shannon Dawson got his own way and Mario Cristobal thought it would be cute to go ahead and run a play instead of just taking a knee and secure a win. There's a matchup this weekend against Miami versus North Carolina, another team that people need to start paying attention to, and it should be a top 15 game. But instead, Miami barely stays alive because of their Miami, and they lose to Georgia Tech in the most baffling, moronic fashion possible. But Miami still can control its own destiny, probably get to about, I would say, 10-2, 9-3 on the year, and make this a must-see top 25 matchup. And the same thing goes for Kentucky. Kentucky has a very good rushing attack led by Sweet Baby Ray Davis. They have a veteran quarterback in Devin Leary. They have some weapons that can be very effective in the open field, primarily in the slot. But you do see that there are flaws with this team. Not enough to where you can probably put them outside the top 25, but definitely enough where you can say this is a game in favor of Louisville. So those are two games that are on your schedule that definitely deserve some watching. After that, you have Pitt, you have Duke, and Duke right now, we have no idea what the status is of Riley Leonard. He could be back. He couldn't be back. If you don't have Riley Leonard, I think this is a big win in favor and a momentum shifter in favor of Louisville. But even so, I still believe in what you have with Jawar Jordan on the rushing attack and what you have in the passing game with Jack Plummer, you're in a very good spot to basically manhandle and work your way inside the red zone, kind of like Clemson did, but Clemson just couldn't find their way to cross the goal line. Like there was so many opportunities for Clemson to not only get a major win against now what seems to be a good Duke team, but a game where they probably could have dismantled Duke and the entire process would have been thrown out the window. That was what was at the disposal for Clemson in that game. And you could do that if you're Louisville as long as you trust what works and what doesn't. And Louisville right now has a decent passing attack. They know what they have with Jawar Jordan in the rushing game. They also have another running back that was a transfer this offseason, Isaac Guerrero, who came over from Wisconsin. So now you have a 1-2 combination and a change of pace player, and you have wide receivers that are at your disposal as well. So you're probably going to win there. You also play Pitt. Pitt this season vastly has underachieved, even without Phil Jakovic at quarterback. Virginia Tech and Virginia, those are probably wins. Both of these teams are in a major influx of what they identify as roster-wise. So you should feel like going into the final 2 weeks of the season, if you're not undefeated, you're probably with a one loss on your schedule, and it would be to Duke. And even then, Duke at that point would probably lose to somebody else to where they would be out of the conversation for the ACC championship game. So as of this moment, Louisville, the way the roster is constructed, the way they've been coached, the way they went in the transfer portal, they were a top 10 team this past year in the transfer portal rankings according to 247 Sports. The fact they have all that would suggest that as long as they continue to play teams when they're at their low point, it is a similar formula to what happened with TCU. And TCU didn't win the Big 12 title game last year, but because they were undefeated going into that matchup and they had compelling ranked wins against teams in the Big 12. Oklahoma State was ranked. Texas was ranked. Kansas was ranked. All of these teams that they played at the time were ranked. It benefited their strength of schedule, and they snuck in as one of the Final Four teams. And then, bygones be bygones, they made it to the national championship. We know what happened next, but besides that, you can make the argument that was a team that deserved, based off of its resume, to be a Final Four roster. Louisville has a very similar impact. Am I saying that they're the exact same team? Not the slightest. But there is a team that you could say, well, they do have similarities in how the roster was built and how they are establishing dominance on Saturdays to TCU of last year. The Louisville Cardinals are probably your team. Make sure you hit subscribe. Make sure you download the channel. Follow us every single day as we talk college football, NFL, NBA, and a bunch of other stuff. And make sure you're following me on social media at Mr. Cole Thompson. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching that video. Don't hit the X button yet. Make sure you hit subscribe to keep up with all of our daily content found on Just Saying It and anything else that we post on this channel. Bye.